Ladies and gentlemen, it's a huge pleasure to be with you all once again. Coming to this university.
For nearly 3 decades, the story of Andrew Parker Bowles's divorce from Queen Camilla was treated as nothing more than aristocratic housekeeping. 2 people drifting apart, a clean break, and little else. The world assumed it was Charles, Diana, and the inevitable pull of royal destiny that ended their marriage. But now, after 30 years of silence, Andrew has finally spoken. His words are not bitter or vengeful, but devastating in their simplicity. He insists the truth has been misunderstood, and what he reveals is not a love triangle, but something far more chilling: the cost of ambition. Andrew Parker Bowles has lived most of his life on the edge of royal history, close enough to brush against the grandeur, but far enough to remain invisible. Born into privilege, the son of Derek Parker Bowles, a man deeply connected to the royal household, Andrew seemed destined to belong within the orbit of the crown. When he and Camilla Shand became a couple in the late 1960s, it felt like a natural union. Both came from noble circles, shared friendships, and adored the same things: horses, polo, and the rituals of country society. They were the golden couple of their generation, dazzling the aristocratic scene with a romance that appeared timeless. Friends described them as inseparable, their names appearing together in society columns, their laughter carrying across fox hunts and gala dinners. Andrew, tall and devastatingly handsome, was a rising officer in the household cavalry. Camilla, sharp-witted and earthy, stood out among her peers as someone who could make anyone feel at ease. To outsiders, their connection was perfect, almost enviable. Yet behind the photographs and the polite smiles, their relationship was never quite as seamless as it looked. Andrew's reputation as a flirt was no secret, and Camilla herself harbored a connection that refused to fade into the past. From the beginning, their love story carried shadows that would one day darken into something far more consuming. At first glance, Andrew and Camilla had everything that mattered in high society: beauty, status, and pedigree. But beneath the polished exterior, cracks were already forming. Andrew's charm, so admired in public, often manifested as infidelity in private. He was a man who relished attention, equally at ease, charming women at cocktail parties as he was commanding soldiers in uniform. Camilla, however, was not blind. She understood the unspoken rules of her world. Men strayed, women looked the other way, and appearances mattered more than fidelity. Yet Camilla herself was not untouched by passion. Long before her marriage, she had shared an intense affair with Charles, Prince of Wales. Though it ended when Charles was sent abroad, it was never truly extinguished. Andrew claims that even in the early years of their marriage, the signs were obvious. Camilla would keep letters tucked away, step aside for hushed phone calls, and accept invitations that seemed intended for both of them, but carried an undertone of exclusivity. For a while, she played her part flawlessly: the devoted wife, the attentive mother, the gracious hostess. But Andrew sensed something elusive in her affection, a distance he could never quite bridge. Their home was filled with friends, laughter, and family. But when the guests left and the children were asleep, silence stretched between them. To their world, they were a model couple. To Andrew, they were already 2 people moving in different directions, tethered together by tradition rather than passion. The specter of Charles was always present, not in confrontation, not in public scandal, but in subtle, insidious ways that Andrew could not ignore. He recalls finding scribbled notes tucked in drawers, nothing obscene, but far too intimate to be exchanged between mere friends. He grew used to the quiet phone calls that ended when he entered the room, to the weekend visits where Camilla's eyes sparkled a little brighter, her voice lifted a little higher when Charles's name was mentioned. Invitations to Highgrove arrived addressed to both of them, yet it was clear who they were meant for. Andrew tried at first to bury his suspicions under the weight of aristocratic custom. Affairs, after all, were hardly scandalous in their circles. But Charles was not a fling. He was a presence, constant, enduring, and unyielding. The children began to notice their mother's frequent absences, the unexplained weekends away. Andrew's pride kept him from asking too many questions, yet deep inside he knew. The world has always imagined that the affair was about sex, but Andrew insists it was much more. It was emotional, strategic, a bond that reached beyond passion into something Camilla refused to let go of. Over time, it hollowed their marriage from within. There were no shouting matches, no explosive rows, only a quiet erosion, like water wearing away stone. And for Andrew, the cruelest wound was not betrayal, it was invisibility. The ghost of Charles lingered in every room, a reminder that he was never truly enough. The unraveling reached its peak with humiliation on a global scale. In 1993, the infamous Camilla tapes were leaked, a raw, intimate phone call between Charles and Camilla that shocked the nation. While the press reveled in the scandal, dissecting every whispered word, Andrew's reaction was startlingly calm. "I wasn't surprised," he would later admit. He had known for years, after all. But hearing the truth confirmed in the cruelest possible way, broadcast for the entire world, was a different kind of wound. For Diana, it was heartbreak. For Andrew, it was confirmation that the marriage he had endured was nothing more than a facade. Yet even then, he did not storm into the headlines, did not fight for sympathy, did not crumble in public. Instead, he withdrew further, retreating into silence and detachment. Friends recall dinner parties where Camilla would light up at the mention of Charles, but fall cold at any reference to Andrew's military triumphs or their children's lives. The balance was unmistakable. Charles was her world, and Andrew was merely a placeholder. By the time the tapes were splashed across newspapers, Andrew had already emotionally exited the marriage. The humiliation wasn't new, only louder. And for a man who had endured years of invisibility, it was the final proof that he was standing in a story that had never belonged to him in the first place. Camilla Gate may have shattered public illusions, but for Andrew Parker Bowles, the true shock came not from betrayal, but from transformation. The woman he had married in the late 1970s was irreverent, witty, and full of life, someone who laughed loudly and made jokes at the expense of aristocratic formality. But by the early 1990s, that woman was gone. In her place stood someone far more calculating, a woman whose focus had shifted from family and social gatherings to influence and strategy. According to Andrew, Camilla began to host not just friends, but carefully chosen guests, press contacts, sympathetic politicians, courtiers with knowledge of protocol. She kept folders of newspaper clippings, scribbled notes on optics, and studied royal schedules like blueprints for her future. She had once mocked such games, but now she played them, and she played to win. For Andrew, this was not about Charles anymore. It was about power. Every dinner became a performance, every outing a calculated step. Their home, once alive with warmth, now felt like a staging ground. Andrew would later reflect that the marriage had not been destroyed by infidelity, but by ambition. The earthy, carefree woman he had loved had been replaced by someone willing to sacrifice almost anything for a crown. He stood by quietly, increasingly sidelined, realizing that he was no longer her partner, but a prop in her pursuit of legacy. The marriage had transformed, not into a battlefield, but into an empty stage where only one actor mattered, and it wasn't him. The breaking point came quietly, without shouting or drama. It was during one of Camilla's returns from Highgrove when tensions finally snapped. In a private quarrel, she delivered words that would stay with Andrew forever. This marriage was always going to be transitory. You served as the bridge, not the destination. It wasn't anger that struck him, but clarity. After decades of suspicion and silence, she had confirmed what he had long feared. He had never truly been the point of her story. Their life together, their children, their home, reduced in an instant to a stepping stone on her path to something greater. Andrew later admitted he could have endured betrayal, endured Charles, even endured humiliation, but he could not accept that his family had been relegated to a chapter in someone else's strategy. That moment shattered whatever loyalty remained. He did not slam doors or storm out, but something inside him shut down completely. Within months, he had moved into another wing of their estate, and not long after, divorce proceedings began. The palace, ever conscious of optics, encouraged silence. They wanted a clean split, no headlines, no bitterness, no spectacle. Andrew complied, not out of fear, but to protect his children from the circus. On January 11, 1995, the divorce was finalized. To the world, it appeared civilized and uneventful. But to Andrew, it was the quietest act of strength he had ever managed, walking away from a woman he loved, not because she chose another man, but because she chose power. After his divorce, Andrew Parker Bowles vanished from the royal narrative as swiftly as he had once been part of it. There were no tell-all interviews, no memoirs, no attempts at revenge. He remarried in 1996 to Rosemary Dickinson, a landscape designer and longtime friend, in a quiet ceremony with no media fanfare. For the first time in years, Andrew lived life on his own terms. He dedicated himself to his horses, his regiment, and most importantly, his children. Friends say he rediscovered himself, freed from the cold performance his marriage had become. Unlike others in the royal orbit, Andrew never sought the spotlight. His dignity lay in silence, in choosing not to profit from scandal. Yet even as he built a quieter existence, he could not completely escape the echoes of his past. Watching Camilla rise from mistress to consort and finally to queen was strange, he admitted. The woman he had once loved, with her warm humor and irreverent charm, was almost unrecognizable when she stepped onto Buckingham Palace balconies, regal and restrained. He harbored no open resentment, but there was a trace of sadness in his voice when he spoke of her transformation. He understood Diana's pain too, describing her as wounded, not dramatic, because he had lived that same story. For Andrew, life after Camilla was not lonely. It was real, grounded, and at last, his own. Walking away had been painful, but it had given him back something priceless: authenticity, a life not scripted by royal ambition. Even in silence, Andrew Parker Bowles became something of a private legend. He was the man who could have sold his story for millions, but didn't. The ex-husband who had every reason to be bitter, but instead chose dignity. Over the years, he attended certain royal functions, always seated a few rows back, watching as an observer rather than a participant. His cordiality with Charles surprised some, but for Andrew, it was a matter of principle. He had no interest in grudges, only peace. When he attended Charles and Camilla's wedding in 2005, it was as though he was turning the last page of a book he had closed long ago. Yet with his recent words, he has reshaped history. His revelation does not threaten Camilla's throne, but it changes how her story is understood. For decades, the public believed he left because of Charles, because of an affair. Now, Andrew insists it wasn't Charles that drove him away. It was Camilla, not her love, but her ambition. His voice reminds us that behind every royal fairy tale lies a human cost: marriages sacrificed, families fractured, identities erased. Camilla's rise is undeniable, but Andrew's confession forces us to ask, what was lost along the way? For the monarchy, his words serve as a warning, a reminder to William and Kate that legacy built on ambition carries a price. For the public, it is a glimpse behind the polished facade, proof that not all crowns are won honorably, and not all love stories end in love. In the decades since, Andrew's reflections have not been about bitterness, but about truth. He admits their marriage had good years, filled with laughter, horses, and the joy of raising Tom and Laura. Yet even those memories are shaded by the realization that he was never truly her destination. "I regret not walking away sooner," he confessed, "not recognizing when I became a placeholder." That clarity, though painful, is what defines his legacy. Unlike others in royal circles, Andrew never clung to status or power. He let go. His silence for 30 years was not weakness, but survival. And now, breaking that silence, he has reminded the world of a side of Camilla few choose to remember, the one who quietly shifted from carefree countrywoman to strategist in pursuit of the crown. His story doesn't threaten the monarchy, but it does puncture the illusion of romance that palace narratives prefer. It reframes Camilla's journey not as destiny, but as calculation. And in doing so, Andrew has finally carved his place in the royal saga, not as the betrayed husband, but as the man who saw through the performance and walked away before it consumed him. Camilla's triumph as queen consort is undeniable, but Andrew's words leave a lingering shadow. His account is not scandalous in the tabloid sense. It's not salacious. It's not explosive. Instead, it's haunting. It is the story of a man who realized he had been erased long before the world noticed. And it is the story of a woman who traded comfort, loyalty, and perhaps love itself for something she considered greater. History will continue to remember Camilla as the woman who survived scandal and ascended to the throne beside Charles. But Andrew's perspective forces a sharper truth. Her rise came with casualties. He was the first, Diana the most visible, and perhaps the monarchy itself remains at risk of being the final one. For Andrew, there is no satisfaction in saying it aloud, no desire for revenge. His words come from clarity, not malice. "They think I fled because of Charles," he said. "But the truth is, I could have lived with Charles. I couldn't live with Camilla as she became." With those words, Andrew Parker Bowles finally ensures history cannot forget him, or the price paid on the long road to a crown. Andrew Parker Bowles didn't lose to Charles. He lost to ambition. His silence lasted 30 years, but his truth now reshapes history, reminding us every crown carries a cost, and not all love stories end in love.